It's time for a sneak peek. Sneak peek, sneak peek.
In a world that is constantly moving, you need to learn and move with it. Why is it so uncomfortable? Because next up is the panic zone. You feel you lose control, there are no boundaries, your brain goes into flight or fight mode, and that we know we don't want to be there. It's not helpful either. So part of the challenge for a leader today is to make sure that the team stays in that learning zone.
And now, on with the show.
When you're feeling the pressure, take a moment to step back, pick up your marbles, and choose to lead with levity. Join us on the Lead with Levity podcast for fireside chats that will fill your bucket and help you get back to being the leader you were meant to be. Now here's your host, Dr. Heather Walker.
Welcome back to the Lead with Levity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Walker, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next guest, Henrik Bresman. Henrik is a Fulbright scholar from MIT, an INSEAD professor who specializes in organizational behavior, executive leadership, high performance teams, and he has a book that you can check out called xTeams, which covers leadership strategies from companies like Microsoft, Takeda, the Museum of Modern Art. He also has co-founded xLEAD, which develops research-based tools for creative leadership across management levels. And one thing that's really cool about this dude that you are going to appreciate is that his research on maintaining diversity and inclusion in organizations was actually published in Harvard Business Review, so you can go check that out. And he's been featured in Time, Forbes, and other popular press outlets. So yes, we are about to nerd out today, people. I hope you are ready. Put your nerd hat on. It is happening today. Henrik, how are you?
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. What an introduction. I was sort of looking around thinking, wonder when that dude is going to walk in. That sounds very impressive. So thank you for that very, very kind introduction. Very good. I am in Singapore, I should say. Even though, so originally Swedish, I am in Singapore. That's why I love having a jungle inside, because we couldn't have that where I grew up. So it's early in the morning here. So I will probably wave my arms a little bit to wake up. Hope that's okay to get started.
Okay, great. Are you awake? Are you ready?
I am ready.
You're awake now? Okay, good. Yes, because it's pretty late over here. We're ending our day in the States, but it's all good. That's one thing that I love about technology. It just brings us all together. It makes the world much smaller, which is super cool. So I'm looking forward to asking you some questions, picking your brain really about what separates regular teams from high performance teams. So first of all, what do you consider a high performance team?
Okay, so the first of all question first. A high performance team to me is a team that performs well on two dimensions. Teams that produces both wealth and well-being. I like the alliteration there, but it could be any kind of instrumental outcome. So it's not always about making money. I work with teams in hospitals, for example, then it's about quality outcomes for patients, but also mental health outcomes for the team members themselves. And I'm particularly interested in how these two dimensions of performance reinforce each other. Now, the first question you had, of course, it's a softball question I really appreciate here as we get started, because this is about xTeams, the book. It starts with the premise that we found in our research that what is often considered good teams, and by that we mean good teams in terms of their focus on what we traditionally think about as high-performing teams, teams that are aligned around their goals, their roles, their processes, their interpersonal relationships. And we say that all of that is absolutely necessary. Don't get me wrong. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but that's just half the story. Because we found that in this fast-changing world that we live in, there is another side of the story that is looming larger and larger, and that is the external side of teams. We need to not only align internally around goals and roles, etc. We also need to align externally around various stakeholders, customers, competitors, technology providers, financiers, what have you. And we need to do both. If you just do one, you will fail. You need to do both. And this is what stand out in our research, that what is very notable in high-performing teams now, in the world we live in here right now, is their external outreach. And that's the X teams. Actually, so I can say that's actually not completely true. The real reason why we call it X teams is because I'm a lifelong fan of the X-Men. But that's the publisher didn't go for that. So we came up with the cover story. It's all about external outreach and connectivity. And I'll stop there. I'm a professor. You said that. So if you don't stop me, I will just start professing. You should feel
true. Should I just raise my hand? I can do that. Okay, so good teams, if I'm hearing you correctly, good teams focus on all of the internal stuff, taking care of their goals, making sure they're aligned with all of that. Great teams also think about what's happening outside of them.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, teams in that definition are no longer good. Let me add a little bit. So the reason why this is surprising to many is that the good teams approach was in fact good until a couple of decades ago. The context in which teams work has changed. They now live in an exponentially changing context that is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, increasingly asynchronous, diverse, and changing at a furious pace. And as this external environment has changed, the external connections have become more important. And that's why what used to work, actually, we had research back then showing that this is enough. It doesn't work anymore because of these changes.
How did you get to the point where you said, you know what, I'm fascinated by high-performing teams?
So my personal side of this, and typically when you talk to researchers, there's a biographical story there. I actually, before I became a professor, my first job was as a manager. I worked a bit in the startup world. I worked a bit as a consultant, and I didn't start my PhD until I was in my 30s. And I came in with this realization that leadership, which was key to the difference between success and failure in everything I saw around me, fundamentally happened in teams, regardless of where you are in an organization or an ecosystem. If you're the CEO or if you're the front lines, most important leadership is exercised in the small moments, if you will, inside teams. And so therefore, I decided to really focus on that aspect of leadership, and that I've done for the last 20 years.
Wow, that's really impressive. So when you've been looking at teams who are good, better, best, and you see managers who maybe are struggling to get their team from good to best, what mistakes are they making?
Well, it's implied in my first answer, so a bit of repetition, but it might be worth it because...
Especially if you can double click into that with specific examples.
Exactly. They focus too much on cohesiveness inside the team with the best of intentions. And the double click is, well, why do teams and team leaders stick to this internal model? And so the starting point to understand how to overcome this and not make this mistake is to understand that what blocks us. Because if you tell a team, maybe you should go out and ask for help, or maybe you should talk to that customer, they will say, that's not exactly brain surgery. Of course, I'll do that. So what blocks them is really two things, I would say. The first is our mental model that seems to be burned into our brains, that when we talk about the team, when we think about the team, it's the people sitting around the team table or the Zoom meeting room. The people are not there, out of sight, out of mind, the people who are outside the team. So that's one thing. Another thing that is even more difficult to manage, actually, is that what our research suggests is that teams that are closed off from the external world, in the short run, there is a lot of harmony there. Because you create a sense of control. It's an illusion of control, but it's a sense of control because you don't need to deal with all of the disharmony that comes from opening up. And we like harmony. If you open up and ask a customer what they really feel about you, it might be kind of punishing. Might not like that. This is not necessarily at the conscious level. It could be at the unconscious level. If you work as an X team, if you're externally active, there will be incoming, as in incoming fire, from stakeholders out there who will tell you what they don't like about. And you will talk to people who may be more powerful than you, who might know more than you about things, which might make you incompetent. All of these things goes into that subconscious process very often that makes us close off.
Well, that sounds terrifying. Why would I want to do that? Raising my hand right now. Why would I sign up for that?
Because, as I said, in the short term, it might feel good to close off. But in the long term, of course, that leads progressively to a failing performance. And then harmony will be out the window either way.
Right.
And you made a shift to be more externally focused. And you start to see that you persist and you see the performance benefits of that. Harmony and satisfaction tends to come in a team in the wake of performance. So it's time, if you make this shift, you'll feel better. But it's a challenging choice.
It just reminds me there really are no shortcuts in life. At some point, you have to go through this thing. You have to run the gauntlet. You have to figure this out and overcome this if you want to get to the other side where your team is actually performing efficiently and in the way that it needs to. So how can we help leaders who might be afraid, terrified of the idea of sort of stepping out and not just being that standard manager avatar that I remember hearing about and seeing growing up? Like, they just clock in, they clock out, they watch everything that I'm doing, and they make sure they tell me exactly what to do. That kind of a manager. How can we help them start to expand? So when you talked about mental models and a sense of control, what might help someone who is listening and they inside raised their hand and said, wait a second, I don't know how I can even begin to do this?
That is, the key is in your question. You need to move from keeping that hand inside to keeping it outside. And by which I mean a lot of leaders today, just about every leader has that little hand inside of them saying, oh, I don't know this. I don't know how this works. However, their concept of leadership very often, again, for the best of intentions, is that, but I can't tell the team members this because then they don't think I'm a leader. And so the starting point is to raise that hand in the team and acknowledge that you don't know and that you need help, asking for help. Now, here's the irony. Of course, the team members already know that you as a team leader don't know, and you know. But see, very often they don't know that you don't know. So you need to tell them that you don't know so you can have a conversation. And so it's really the same kind of vulnerability inside the team that you need to confront that then in the next step becomes the kind of vulnerability that you then need to confront with the external world. And how to build a climate in which not only it's okay to show that vulnerability, but it actually becomes necessary. That's a question we might get to. I want to make a connection to what you said about you. Why would you do this? Because it's uncomfortable. And I often talk to, when I coach team leaders, think about it like this, that when you sit there in your internally comfortable world, you sit in your comfort zone. And what you need to do is that you need to move into the learning zone. And learning zone is a more challenging place, but it's still safe. You keep each other on your toes, but you've got to be in the learning zone in a world that is constantly moving. You need to learn and move with it. Why is it so uncomfortable? Because next up is the panic zone. You feel you lose control. There are no boundaries. Your brain goes into flight or fight mode. And that we know we don't want to be there. It's not helpful either. So part of the challenge for a leader today is to make sure that the team stays in that learning zone. Not neither in the comfort zone nor out there in the panic zone.
So we need guardrails. That's what I'm hearing.
You need guardrails, yes. One way of thinking about it is that when I move my hand like this, oh, people will listen to this. So I'm going to say,
they can't hear your hand moving.
Think about a vertical axis, which is like your level of anxiety in your team. And if it's down at the bottom, you're in the comfort zone, no learning takes place there. But if it's too high up, then you're in the panic zone. Imagine that over time, what you're doing as a leader is that you do need to get the anxiety up a bit, the stress levels up a bit, making people understand that we don't know all the answers here. We need to go out there and learn. But also, if the anxiety gets to be too high, then you need to put boundaries by reminding people that we actually know a lot. We're good at what we're, and here's what we know, and to get the anxiety levels down. So to stay in that, I would actually say, come to think about it, that this is a key leadership skill in today's environment, to be able to go up and down that scale and stay in that middle zone where learning and adjustment happens. Hard in the business of saying, difficult to do. That's what I do.
Very true. So to be sort of the thermometer for the team and to adjust, right?
Yeah.
So I'm never going to let the team get to a point where we're in the panic zone. I'm going to make sure that I'm supporting them, helping them understand that we're going to learn from this. No matter what, it's going to be okay. We're going to learn from this. But then also letting them know when there may be some things that, hey, this is a higher stakes kind of activity. And we've got this. I believe in you. So really balancing learning with some encouragement in there as well. When you're working with teams, do you talk about situational leadership at all?
I actually let me ask a follow-up question first. What when you ask that question, what do you have? Because if I just answer that question, I mean, it could become a quite obvious question. It's an answer, which is we've known about situational leadership for decades, and a leader must adjust to what is going on in a specific situation. That's important. You can't use it. It's a classic, you have a hammer and then you use that for everything. That doesn't work. That's never worked.
So the obvious question that I have is adjusting that to the people on your team. When you have more junior people versus more senior people, getting a sense of when should I give more latitude versus less. But I would even love to push the conversation even further than that, especially since you work with teams. I feel that there's a lot of pressure on leaders. There's a lot of pressure on leaders. Is there ever a situation where you can develop situational leadership within a team where it's not just the leader who knows how to switch things up and respond differently to each person on the team, but also we build in that skill set for the team as well, where each layer gets to a place where they are mature enough as well to be able to do this too. And it's a complete random question. It just popped in my head.
That's an important question. And the reason why I did this, your listeners see or hear this, but I stroked my chin 3 times here. And that means that I'm thinking that there are several pieces to this. I guess this is where I want to take it, is that the situation, I'm thinking about now the situation in the team, as in the team composition. As a team leader, to adjust to your team, but you also need team members to help you with that adjustment. And there are 3 pieces to this. Let's see if I can keep them in mind, despite that it's early in the morning. The first piece we write about in the book, really important to recognize that we are all incomplete leaders, in the sense that we are good at some things and we have limitations in other areas. Each and every one of us, which is why teams, when they work, can be so magical, because under the conditions, we can then build the foundations for complete leadership when we complete each other. And to get there, of course, we need to know each other. We need to build a system where we know what we know and what we don't know. And this is second piece. As a leader, you need to know what motivates people in your team. A very common mistake that team leaders do is that they treat others the way they want to be treated. This is the old golden rule. And as an ethical rule, I think it's something to keep in mind. But in the context of motivating a team, it can completely backfire because others might be motivated very differently from you. So keep that in mind as you try to help people out and draw the best out of other people. The third piece, which is something that is talked a lot about these days, psychological safety. And I've had the privilege of doing some work, and you mentioned the HBR article earlier that I wrote with Amy Edmondson, who's a professor at Harvard, who's done most of the work in this area. It is so important in this context, and I'm trying to pull it all together, the three pieces, because if people in the team are not comfortable talking about what they know and what they don't know, then you will not be able to put that puzzle together. And a starting point, now we're back to 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago, is that you as a leader need to actually start by role modeling to say, hey, here's what I don't know. And here's one of my less good at. Another concept we use in the book is the concept of our leadership signature. Everyone has their leadership signature, just like we have our own hand signature. And as a leader in particular, you really need to know that so that you can communicate this to your team. You know, you communicate your self-knowledge so they can have that to relate to, which, by the way, is something that helps contain the anxiety in a team when they know that you actually know yourself. So those are three pieces to put together. I didn't do the best job of putting them together, but understanding we're all incomplete leaders, understanding that we all have different things that motivates us and demotivates us. And the starting point is to have this psychological safety in the team that allows us to have a real conversation about these things. And then we can talk about how to do that. Well, I'll stop there for now.
Exactly. And it all starts with you kind of knowing yourself with this leadership signature, which is the first time I've heard it. It's kind of a cool term. So if I were to go and try and figure out what my leadership signature is, how would I go about that? What goes into the recipe of a leadership signature?
Now, here, I will say in the book, we have a specific model, but I guess I don't mind if your listeners buy our book. But I feel like my mission is a little bit bigger than selling books. I will tell you about our specific model, but the starting point is really to ask around, ask feedback, figure out, well, how do I come across? How do I show up in a situation that requires leadership? How am I experienced in the situation? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And then once you do that, well, you can develop your signature. So you can, if you find a weakness, you can work on it. But very often, actually, there are some things that are better outsourced. So you can start to think about those things. Now, we have a specific model in the book based on research, not only by us, but a number of colleagues that suggests there are 4 leadership capabilities in particular that tends to be differentiated across team members. So I'll just mention that briefly. The first one is what we call sense-making capability. Your ability to actually make sense of the territory around you, to come up with an accurate map of where you operate. And importantly, your ability to redraw the map as the world outside changes. Researchers are great at this. I mean, we love making sense. That's just one of the capabilities. The next one is the relating capability. This is your ability to really understand where people are. This is where empathy comes in. You need to understand where people come from, their perspectives, stand in their shoes, as the saying goes. But that's just part of it. You also need to be able to advocate from your own point of view. If you just listen to others, that's not leadership. So sense making, relating. And then you have visioning, which is what most people in our experience think about when they think about leadership. This is about laying out a compelling vision that people can smell and taste and be excited about. So let's say you have all of these things. You have an accurate map of the territory. You have people who, through relating, you are excited to follow you. And then you have a vision, so you know where to go. You still won't go anywhere unless you have the 4th capability, which is what we call inventing. This is about execution, but it's more than just execution, because in an exponentially changing context, you need to constantly change the structures and the processes for execution. So these are the 4 fundamental pieces, and we find that no one is great at all of this. So it's a way to start to think about this. It's like, what are you best at, relatively speaking? And what should you then outsource to others in the team? And this is easy to say, difficult to do, because left to our own devices, we tend to bring people onto our teams who are just like us. That's why academic leadership is a challenge, because academics in our universities, we sit there, we make sense of things, but sometimes it's challenging for us to go and get things done because we just love kinds of things. So you need that diversity. And we do have, for those of your listeners who are interested, we do have an instrument called the X360, where we help people make sense, help them discover their leadership signature in terms of these pieces. There are a few other pieces too, but I'll keep it simple. That's the core of it.
Very cool. So that's a 360-degree feedback where you're collecting information from peers and others. Exactly. Okay, very cool. So I think this makes a lot of sense. When you're thinking about what the rest of this year could look like, which before we hit record, you and I were talking about this and we were just like, oh, this year is getting away from us. There's a lot going on already.
Yes.
What do you want leaders to keep at the forefront, to keep in mind?
I'll say two things. One is that what we just talked about, so incredibly important, in particular, the sense-making abilities and understanding. So develop the sense-making abilities in your team and understanding why it's difficult, because it can be anxiety-inducing to go out there. And I'm just speaking about the world. There's a lot of anxiety out there now. People wonder what is happening, which is why in this world right now, paradoxically, when we have all of this complexity and no one could possibly know all the answers to how things need to be done to lead into the future, it is particularly at this point in history when strong leaders who step up and say, only I can fix it, I have all the answers, you follow me. It is particularly compelling and seductive because so many people are in the panic zone. And I'm not singling out any particular leaders here because I know how politically fraught things are, particularly in the US right now. Regardless of the person on the top of an organization or a country, they will not know all the answers. So therefore, sense-making, to spend more time on your sense-making. But of course, you also need the anchor of your values. You really need to be very clear in your mind about what your values are and why you're doing the things you're doing in the first place. So I think those two things, sense-making on the stormy sea, but if you don't have an anchor to know what it is that you're trying to accomplish, then the risk is that you get overwhelmed or lost at sea.
Yes, that is a really important message that I think we all need to keep in mind. Thank you so much. It just reminds me, it's something that I remind myself all the time. If not you, then who? And if not now, then when? So it's important that we all continue to keep those things in mind as we move forward. Henrik, I appreciate you so much for coming onto the podcast, for joining me today. And if anyone is interested in getting connected with you, where should they go?
I am the only one in the world, as far as I know, with my name. So I'm easy to find. I would accept any invites on LinkedIn, of course. And then we do have a website for the tools related to the book, xlead.co, not com, co. So it's xlead.co, where you can learn anything about this 360 I mentioned, and also a simulation that we set up that we're quite proud of for how you can learn how to work as an X team. And then on LinkedIn, I, together with my co-author, I also have a newsletter called X News, where you can read up on our latest sense making.
Nice. Thank you. All right. So those are some really good resources. We're also going to have them on the page with the show notes. So when you go look up the podcast, if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the links to those. Henrik, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lead with Levity podcast. To get resources mentioned in this episode and find out what we're all about, check us out at leadwithlevity.com.